We haven't been on there for a long time.
You know, I hadn't even thought about that, about you could use them lower level.
Hey, we can do it.
Space, we can just lease that.
Need some security, we'd be here.
Okay.
Hey, we're gonna have a
Becky said she'd
pre-event
help.
meeting here in the council
Yeah.
chambers tomorrow at 3:30. The vice president's coming to town Monday the 17th. So if you see a bunch of Secret Service and different uniforms, that's what we're up here doing.
What? We need Secret Service here now?
No, we don't, but they're coming anyway. So,
For when?
the 17th, Monday the 17th, we're gonna have a pre-event meeting tomorrow here at 3:30.
And who's coming?
Yeah, who's coming?
The VP, vice president.
Oh.
Where? When?
Well, he's gonna fly in here Monday, and that's all we know. He's got a deal in Ottumwa, so I don't know if he's gonna even do something here in
Oh,
town.
I see.
Joe Biden.
He's gonna land here in town, we know that much.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that. Exciting.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Exciting.
I love it.
No, I wouldn't either. But there might be some people that don't find that.
You're moving on pretty good.
Oh, hey, I'm good with that. I may be icing it for the rest 3 days.
You want to do the talk show on Wednesday, Jackie? Or do you want me
I got to, I have to see what my schedule is. At the end of the meeting. We can help them with all this pieces. See where the teachers went.
I saw that, yeah.
My birthday was long ago.
We got a lot of stuff to cover tonight, it looks like to me.
It was Friday. It was Friday.
Do what's right.
They were kind of delegated me to have to sing happy birthday.
It was Friday.
Rosa, are we singing happy birthday?
Jim's birthday.
Today's his birthday.
No, it's Friday.
Happy birthday.
Hey, one game. If it's your Super Bowl, you go ahead and pick it up. He's a Cowboys fan.
He was trying to be.
What's going on?
That was
One bedrooms, aren't
that's
they?
huge.
Yeah.
Another floor was different, there's golf courses.
You know what happens when things are heavy?
Park right in front of her.
Actually, does he chill for
It seems kind of odd to me.
Oh, here's 2 bedrooms here. These are 2 bedrooms. 2 bedrooms alone.
He doesn't have that killer instinct. He doesn't.
Oh,
Because it's just too much.
So you're
noise.
67, 68? 70?
60.
Oh, 67. Shane said you were 70. I don't trust him, though.
Jim's catching up with me.
Year by year.
He's got a long way to go.
percentage-wise?
Never mind, you're out of order.
Hey, we're all getting older together.
Who are you gonna take, Mayor? Who are you gonna take first, Jason or Travis?
Travis goes last.
Hey, then you have just one person here who's on behalf of Friends, and they can make their presentation and get out.
Is that okay with you? Go last.
I have a meeting at the school at 7.
We'll be done. We have to be, this room is used by P&Z at 6:30. I don't think you're planning on being more than an hour anyway, are you?
Okay, folks, it's 4:30. Let's get started on our work session on Monday, September 10th. The presentation by Steamboat Days will be taking place next Monday, I presume, at council meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
And what does that amount to?
It's annually, they come and present a check for, well, how much? $10,000?
$10,000.
$10,000. Okay. We have 2 public hearings next week, both of them along a similar vein, considering tax increment payments. If you remember, Council, I think it was in January, perhaps, we dealt with the Weingard purchasing of the Fairway Center, and we agreed to a proposal by them to rebate to them.
Yeah, I wish the percentage was in here.
And perhaps we can have that explained to us, and that'll be,
Back in January, you would
Yeah.
have, you
Well,
agreed
just the percent.
75%
Yeah.
for the first 5 years and 50% for the next 5. When you approved that back in January, it was open-ended. For TIF purposes, we were required to put a not-to-exceed dollar amount on that.
Okay. I just would, well, I don't know, I just want it out there that
Sure.
it's the percentage and not this dollar amount, because it may never come to this, and,
Yeah.
75%. So we still get an increase of that 25% and an increase of the 10%, or 50% the last 10 years. So
Yes.
we're,
Last 5 years.
because of this deal, we're bringing in more tax,
Yeah,
property
but-
revenue.
And that one was, the numbers that were in there, there were a lot of different valuations that were put out. And I think the last valuation came through an appraisal process. When you did the enterprise zone status in June, that was when you had to formally get an assessor's estimate of what the non-binding opinion of what the valuation would be after construction. And the 1,300,000 and whatever, the 330,000 that's in here is based off of that non-binding opinion from the assessor's office of what would be generated, what would be abated from the 75% abatement for 5 years and 50% for the next 5 years. But yes, they will continue to pay the base amount from what the base valuation is currently.
And an additional amount.
And an additional amount.
maybe I understand this correctly. The understanding I had was that they were going to pay the tax and then we were going to refund it to them.
Correct. Yeah, it's a rebate.
Right, it's a rebate, not an abatement.
Yeah.
Right.
When they were here, they also talked about water runoff and what have you. Is that an issue relative to this, or is that a separate issue?
Steve, what all are they doing in terms of stormwater runoff with this project?
They show a pond there in the drawing set.
And they're running, in terms of with the development they're doing, they're putting in a roadway running north-south down the middle of that property, and they're putting in stormwater intakes along there and running a lot of the stormwater through there.
Yeah, new trunk line for storm sewer that runs straight through.
And then they'll
They
s-
need to take that over because it collects west of Mount Pleasant Street.
So they're putting in that infrastructure as part of their project, and then that does become ours. Do they still does the other main line stay where it is currently, or does that get abandoned?
I think several portions of it abandoned.
So we're getting a new line through there for handling stormwater runoff as part of this
I
project.
think it's a great deal for us.
I think it's really important that people understand this is not money coming out of the city's pocket. It's being paid by Weingart Company, and then the money is being rebated back to them, right, based on the valuation increase of the property. Okay, so technically, we had approved this. It's just a matter of getting this number in here, and we can't, in other words, up to 1,380,330, and then
Correct.
once they reach that limit, then that's the end. Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments, council, or?
How did the figure come in?
Now again, Jason, you talked to the county assessor, and they figured out, they made an estimate of what the new valuation will be. Then what they did was they said, if it's that, based off of our current property tax rate, what would be abated during the next 10 years? 75% rebate for 5 and 50% rebate for 5. By those formulas would be the 1,330,000, whatever the number is.
So it's cumulative.
It's cumulative. Now, if the value does not come in at that, if it ends up being assessed lower than that figure, they will get a lower number than that 1,300,000.
I got you.
And if the value comes in higher, that's to our benefit. They have a maximum that they can get for a rebate amount.
But either way, they're going to pay more taxes than what we've been drawing off of
Yes.
that property.
It's gonna be a beautiful development too.
Exactly, and it's, you've got to think long-term, because after those 10 years, now you're back to 100%. And you got to figure it's not a 10-year deal. They're going to wipe it out in 10 years, so. I think we need to keep that in mind as we're talking about all of these potential issues here. And it's not just a short-term issue we're talking about. Okay. Jason, would you like to come and talk to us about the next one? This is with the Shell building.
Well, I hadn't necessarily planned any remarks tonight unless there are
Okay,
questions.
all right. Our next public hearing then is a consideration of the development agreement with the Greater Burlington Partnership. Again, with the same tax increment rebate structure. This one not exceeding $500,000.
And this one, again, the Shell building was built in 2004, close to having it sold just before the market changed in 2008. And since then, it's not in the same type of a competitive position, just because there's much more. If you go around and look at vacant space around the country, there's a lot more vacant space than there was back in 2008.
I guess, oh, go ahead.
Well, that's the construction cost was in the $1.5 million range. You have a sale amount somewhere in the $1 million range. The person who's buying it is looking to have to finish off that structure. The assumption from Jason's office is that the assessed value on that after those improvements are done will come in somewhere in the $2.2 million range. The person buying that property may be asking for the industrial tax exemption. I don't know if they've filed for that as of now, but they technically could be filing for that. Tax abatement that they could formally apply for is the industrial is 75% the first year, 60% the second, 45% the third, 30%, then 15% in the fifth year.
With this, though?
That's an abatement, but they don't pay any property
Right.
taxes on at all. The request that's here before you is out of what they do have to pay. That we would do a grant that's a rebate of the portion of those property taxes. They've asked for 100% of the value that's for the new valuation coming on for the first 10 years up to that 500,000. It may or may not be assessed high enough to bring in 500,000 after the abatement's done. That kind of, again, depends on where it does actually get assessed at.
How is that going to affect us if they do file for the industrial?
It doesn't have any real impact on us. They're the ones who are on the hook for it. If there is not enough property tax valuation property tax coming in to make the rebate payment, we have basically we're rebating 100% of those taxes up to the 500,000. If there isn't enough after that abatement's done, if there isn't enough property taxes being paid to pay 500,000, they are the ones that don't receive as much as they were hoping
They,
for.
you meaning Grow Greater Burlington?
Grow Greater Burlington.
So it's not an either or, because, I mean, it's not like either they get this or they get the abatement. They can get the abatement and,
The new property owner can file for the tax abatement. This is something where they're asking to be made whole on their development costs on this project that they aren't able to recoup through the sale price. And would be doing that through increased property taxes. This is a spot where this building's been around since 2004 and has not been paying any property taxes. The way the spec buildings or shell buildings aren't subject to tax until they are sold and developed. So we have had no benefit off of it. This will help us long-term to get a benefit off of it. It gets a liability off of the partnerships books, and they are a partner for development within the community. So your reason for considering it is you want to help them to be made whole on this and viable for moving forward with another project down the road.
I guess I would have a question for Jason.
Sure.
Were you aware that they could get this tax abatement also?
When the numbers that I gave you last week figured in the assumption that they would take the tax abatement.
Okay.
So the $706,000, which off the top of my head I think is what the number I said in total taxes paid, that assumed they would take that 5-year sliding
Okay.
scale industrial
All right.
tax payment. One other thing, if I could say about these two projects in particular, both of these projects are occurring in an enterprise zone that you have established, and under the enterprise zone program that the state has, developments can receive a 100% tax abatement for 10 years on an approved enterprise zone program. Weingard Company did receive the enterprise zone status. So it is an enterprise zone project, and therefore you could have offered, according to state code, 10-year 100% tax abatement on that property. It's been structured as a TIF instead of that. This project did not seek enterprise zone approval, in part because of the short timeline that this project was on, and the state process takes about 60 days. But had it gone through that and been approved, it could have asked for a 10-year 100% tax abatement. So I did not mention that last time, and I thought it was at least worthy of.
Well, I think I would just want to know that you know that, I guess, more than anything, because it isn't going to affect us either way.
Right.
No, and these, the way we've had these presented, and the one that, the next presentation that will be up on the agenda here tonight, are all in the tax rebate type structure. And there's one major benefit with that for us, given the climate in Des Moines. There is a major discussion going on what's going to happen with property taxes for commercial industrial. Having it as a strict dollar amount, cash up front, puts an awful lot of liability on us, and we're already facing a lot of liabilities. This puts the risk more on it's a risk reward for the developer. If they don't have to pay as much property taxes, they're just not paying them. So, but those discussions aren't such a concern for us as how do we make those long-term TIF payments if we formatted as a rebate of the taxes. That's just a better format for
It
seeing
is,
these
it
occur.
really is for where we are financially. It's, and I am happy we've been presented this way because I feel like we've got private dollars interested in investing, and this works for both of us.
Anything else need to be said about that, folks? Okay. All right, that public hearing is Monday, of course. Moving on to the consent agenda, we'll come back to discussion items. Nuisance abatements, a couple of short pages this time, that's a little better. And resolution approving final acceptance, release retention monies for Crystal Drive. That means the project's finished and it looks good, right? Meets all the requirements. Okay. Resolution approving purchase of the end loader, case loader. That's a lot of money for a consent agenda item. I guess I would rather have that on the regular agenda, if that's
How
okay
much
with
is
it.
it?
$99,000, $99,500.
I'm fine with that, because I was gonna ask if there was, how much we've looked around at other, granted, I don't know loaders, but if we've looked around at other pricing too, or pricing structures.
I think there's a requirement. Steve, can you speak to that?
Because I know they talked about not getting a pickup truck because of this being higher than what they budgeted for.
Yeah, this is a budgeted item for this year, and the vendor would have been a low bid vendor through the
Okay.
Minnesota DOT. So,
Okay.
I mean, the process has been made
Okay.
to seek those low prices. A couple reasons that our estimate was low. They've got some extra costs in emissions controls. And then this loader has some bucket features that we really need if we're going to buy this piece of equipment. We felt that we wanted to stick with the bid, get the attachments. We felt that keeping those attachments were more valuable than the programmed pickup truck.
Okay.
Okay. Am I the only one that thinks that way now, or is it okay, council, if we move that to regular agenda?
I think
or-
that sounds
Yeah,
good.
I think we should, in case someone else has something they want to
Yeah,
say about it.
okay. All right, so noted then. And then we have a resolution selecting a company to provide facade improvement for downtown. Remember, we got this grant from Community Development Block Grant? Remind me again, how much was that?
500,000. I think Steve
$500,000.
Freebird is here if you would
Okay.
have questions.
And we're authorizing Metzger Johnson Architects to be the ones to work with us on that. That's all this resolution amounts to. I don't see any real problem with that, do you guys? It's okay?
Just following the rules.
Yep. And then we also, on the consent agenda, we have the street report that routinely we do every year. I don't know if there's anything outstanding that we need to look at there. Is it Stephanie's? Where did Stephanie go? Yeah. Is there anything we need to note in that?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right.
Has anybody got any questions?
I did.
No, I'm okay with it. It's just a report we have to file every year anyway, right? Okay. Okay. All right, discussion items. I'd like to have us move to the Fourth and Valley Rehabilitation Project. Okay. Jason, I understand you're going to start us off, and then
Sure.
Mr. Hobart, maybe.
I'm here tonight with Jim Hobart of Franz Hobart and Steve Freebird as well. And I've come to see you a lot lately because we have a lot of investment, or at least potential investment, coming to town.
Yay.
A side effect of that is that we've had jobs created and we're running into a rental housing crunch. And I've been preaching this for at least several months now. And if you talk to any realtor or any HR person throughout the community, getting folks to relocate here is a challenge. There are a couple of reasons why rentals in particular are in demand. One is folks new to the community want to test out the community. They also want to test out their employer. They feel like they plant their feet a little bit more if they buy a home, and so they prefer to rent. And then those who might want to buy a home may not have 20% down for a home. And so it is perhaps a little more challenging, and as a result, we've seen an increase in the demand for rental housing. The development, and I'm going to turn it over to the developer here, or the potential developer here in a moment, would create some additional housing in our downtown. And so, Jim, I want to go ahead and bring you up here to talk a little bit about the project.
First of all, the word developers we don't like to use. We're community investors, so we'll get that straight right off the bat.
But just so the folks at home know who you are, would you introduce
Jim
yourself?
Hobart, I'm one of the partners of Franz Hobart Management Services.
Okay. Thank you.
To tell you a little bit about about Franz Hobart, our business plan in our little section of the pie is historic renovations. We love doing them. We look for those type of projects. We get called in by many, many cities around Iowa, Wisconsin, South Dakota, Illinois. We've probably got about contacts with about 12 to 15 cities right now that we are in some stage of either completion of work, projects going on, or developing relationships and contracts to do work. We've completed 2 in Dubuque, Iowa. We completed the old St. Thomas More Rectory in Iowa City is complete and full, and we're doing a downtown city, almost a full city block in Monmouth, Illinois right now. We've got it gutted, getting ready to rebuild it. We're in Grinnell, we're here, Fort Madison, looking in Keokuk, Clinton, Fort Dodge, I've got a meeting there this week, Green Bay, Wisconsin, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Grand Rapids, South Dakota. So we're pretty widespread, and this is really our piece of cake of what we love to do. We like the historic part of these projects. Typically, everything we do is residential above with mixed-use commercial below on the main street levels. We look for the downtown areas that have buildings that sit in the historic districts, and that's just kind of what our genre is, I guess, for what we do. We were approached by Randy Weingart about this 4th and Valley project. We came down, took a look at it, and immediately we saw a lot of value for downtown Burlington. What we've got planned is 58 upper unit apartments, a mix between 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom. Heavier on the 1-bedroom side, we found that the young professionals who we target to are more looking for 1-bedroom, nice large 1-bedroom units. And our target are the young professionals. We're not into student housing or assisted living housing. Not to say that we don't have something like that going on, but typically for downtowns that want to get revitalized, we look for the people that have expendable income or disposable income to use downtown. Mm-hmm. The apartments range from $700 for 1-bedrooms all the way up to $1,000 for 2-bedrooms. First floor, there's approximately 21,000 square feet of commercial space on the first floor. We'll leave that pretty much open until we find the customers or the tenants for certain areas so we can divide it up per their needs. About us, I guess I've kind of already told you pretty much about what we do and where we're at. We do use historic federal, state tax credits. We also go for enterprise zone credits, sales tax credits, and then we look for some type of city private investment credits also, dollars or credits. Go to some of the photos, I guess, of projects we've done. These are some of the ones that are getting close to be completed. We use all upscale appliances, upscale granite countertops and everything. Our showers and our marble showers, we'll get to one of those photos. Ice makers in the refrigerators, nice glass top stoves, We refurbish windows as much as we can to keep the historic value to the building. You can see the shower units are marble with nice glass doors. We do a lot of the small touches like having garbage collection areas on each floor so you don't have to haul your garbage downstairs. We have somebody come in and take care of hauling that down. Typically on the commercial space, we'll try and have a common area for all the residents, for the residential residents, and we try to make it a kind of a full rounded upscale living experience for downtown. Any questions?
Well, this is something I know a little bit about, Becky Anderson, but not market rate rentals, but I do know, since I have used income-based grants and state and federal tax credits, so I know a little bit about how this goes together, but I guess what I wanted to say is I get a lot of calls from young professionals looking for downtown places to live. And mine being income-based, I can't rent to any of those people. So
Right.
I have had young attorneys, young dentists, these people want to live downtown. So I know there's a demand for that. And I guess the other thing I want to say, I guess I have three things. One, since you work with state and federal tax credits, then I'm sure that you have a good relationship with SHPO and
Yes.
and you know the right things. And I think a lot of people, when they start out with that, they don't know, all the rules. So I guess I feel very confident that you know the rules and that's not going to be a problem. And there was something else I wanted to say, I forgot. Oh, what are the size of these units?
A
Square-
typical one-bedroom will start out at about 800 square feet. Some of them may be all the way up to 1,100 square feet for a one-bedroom. The two bedrooms will start at about 1,000 square feet, may go up to 1,200 to 1,300 square feet.
What was the total number of units, did you say?
58 units total. And about SHPO, yes, we have our own in-house people that take care of all the paperwork, which you know is very extensive.
Yes.
And it's not only just the paperwork, it's collaborating with the architect and collaborating with the construction people to make sure everything's done per SHPO guidelines.
And I guess I know what the other question was. Since you seem to be in a lot of different communities, do you try to hire contractors within each community? Do you bid it out within the community?
Yes, that's, our focus is, our first shot is for the local contractors to try and infuse that income back into the community. We also use local banking, which Two Rivers here in Burlington has,
And I see that he is here, so.
yes, they have backed us on the financial end of this project.
And parking is a big issue, right?
Yes. Now, we have worked out an agreement with the city of Burlington to purchase a parking garage that we would lease spots from the city of Burlington.
And I think that is not the city of
It's
Burlington.
not the city,
Well,
so
okay.
just so we don't confuse anyone on this.
It's okay.
Should we go ahead and talk about the finance of the project?
That's the next question.
Yeah,
What
do you want from us?
Well, so far.
I'll have our
All
community
sounds
investor
good.
come back up if necessary, but
So far, I have to, this is great. We love it.
and
now-
you're going to continue thinking that here. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the project finance, and we're estimating that this is going to be a $10 million plus renovation, a very significant investment for our downtown. And as mentioned, they are going to be utilizing some of the credits. One issue with historic revitalization, and that's why lots of credits come into play, is you might invest $10 million in a project, and you may be lucky to get an appraisal that supports half of that investment. And so just because you invest $10 million in a project doesn't mean that an appraiser is going to give you a dollar for dollar credit on that. And so when you're going to obtain a mortgage, you can't have a mortgage worth more than the appraisal. So that becomes tricky in terms of cash flowing the deal and then making the return on investment strong enough to move forward. Dubuque, a few years ago, and of course Dubuque is a benchmark community that we look to when it comes to development. there was a large demand, in fact, almost an insatiable demand for rental housing. And the city decided to become aggressive in attracting upper story development in its downtown. Now, it did not hand out incentives to everyone that asked. They created some standards in terms of, we want these to be market rate, we want them to be nice, clean, we want a strong management firm managing the project. But what they did is they put together a fund that offered $10,000 in cash for every unit. So on a project like this, you'd be talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000 of cash going into a project. In the Dubuque project that Franz and Hobart worked on, this incentive was available. There was an immediate adjacent covered parking solution that they were able to utilize. And the city also provided them with a 100% TIF rebate for a 15-year time period. When we began working this project, not quite a year ago, but it's been close to a year, there was a project gap in terms of what it costs to do the project and then the return on investment that would give this a green light. And this is the gap that we face, and I want to be clear about this. $580,000 in cash is what it would have taken to make this deal happen, plus a 95% TIF rebate for 15 years, plus a parking ramp to accommodate the parking solution. And the estimated cost on that parking ramp would be $2.25 million. Now, I think parking is one of those challenges. You'd love to have a private solution come along to build a parking ramp. I'm not sure exactly what you're charging for permits. I think it's around $15 or $20 a month. In downtown Chicago, you can get $50 a night. So there's a very different level of economics when you're dealing with a parking ramp. And we were cognizant of the city's financial status when it came to cash and when it came to building a parking ramp. And so we have spent many, many months. I think this project would have liked to have gone sooner, but we've spent a lot of time trimming costs, narrowing the margins, and getting this project as manageable as possible. The current project gap calls for the following: zero in cash. We've gone from $580,000 in cash from the city to zero. And we've gone from needing 95% TIF rebate over 15 years to 90%. And we have also spent a lot of time carving out a parking solution that is independent of the city's involvement. This is not a complete solution at this point, but the tentative plan is... let me back up just a moment and show you the aerial of the building we're talking about. We're talking about the 4th and Valley, so it's on the southeast corner of 4th and Valley. Modo's is in this end of the facility at this point in time. There is a city-owned parking lot here and a city-owned parking lot here. For appraisal purposes, the appraiser, and rightly so, said you're probably not going to be able to rent units for $700 to $1,000 a month if you're making folks park 2 blocks away and carry their groceries in a blizzard and in 95-degree heat. So you've got to have a parking solution that is immediately adjacent to the building or right next to. And so it would have seemed logical to have built a ramp somewhere close. What we are proposing is for downtown partners to acquire an existing parking garage that is about a half a block away from the facility. It will offer not just covered parking, but enclosed and secure parking to those tenants. And then the plan would be to lease a certain number of stalls to the tenants of this facility. This does not solve downtown parking for the long term. If we're going to develop upper story living in a number of buildings in the area, there's going to have to be a long-term solution. It does provide a solution for this project and bridges the gap between now and when those other developments may occur. Steve, can I have you talk a little bit about from the DPI perspective?
Sure. I think the mayor said it well. We're super excited about this. Been biting my tongue for a long time. I totaled up the square footage. There's about 98,000 square feet in these buildings. 85,000 of that is vacant and has been vacant in the 10 years that I've lived here. So we're talking about making that useful space again. As Jim mentioned, we're looking at increasing the customer base for downtown businesses. These are young professionals and well-paid people who will be dining at downtown restaurants, shopping at downtown stores, using downtown banks, going to downtown churches, using the riverfront, using all the great amenities that we have. Creation of new commercial space. I will tell you, we have vacant commercial space on the first floor downtown, but for the most part, if it's rentable, it's rented. We have a lot of vacant space that's vacant because of the condition it's in. I'm excited to see the possibility of having some newly developed commercial space. Again, a way to increase the number of businesses downtown. And of course, preservation of historic buildings, and everybody I think knows I'm a building hugger, and I'm glad that the Historic Preservation Commission undertook it 3 years ago or whatever to start getting these properties on the National Register. They would not be eligible for these tax credits if that wasn't the case. But along with that, I was thinking the other day about some of the losses that we've had. We've had several buildings that we, the city, has had to pay to tear down because they've not been cared for. And I'm not saying that's the case here, but I am saying that the longer a building of any age sits vacant, the more likely it is to deteriorate, and the greater the risk that somebody other than the property owner is going to be responsible for either fixing it up or tearing it down. And I don't want to see that happen ever again in our downtown, anywhere in our community. By preserving these buildings, by giving them new life, I think we're kind of ensuring our own selves as well, so we're not going to have to pay for something down the line. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. What else needs to be said?
Nobody feels like there's going to be a problem filling those 58 units for $700 to $1,000. I mean, Dubuque, they've got a lot more high-paying jobs than Burlington does, but yeah, likely.
Like I said, I personally get calls all the time that people that would fit in here that don't fit in mine, because I have a limit of, I think, 30,000 they can make, where that's unlimited, and they are young people. I mean, I can, yeah, I feel like it should.
There's been times over the past 6 months I've referred people to Becky, knowing that she has properties and they don't make.
And everything I have's full always, but.
So they're looking for that higher end rental, and they're making 35, 40 plus.
Like an engineer moving here for case or something like that, may not be here for years and years. I mean, they need a nice place to live. And
I would like to see, just me personally, I would like to see like a few of them set up handicap, and so that maybe there are older people also that are selling their homes because of death or whatever, and maybe they would be interested in moving downtown too.
I think they all have to kind of.
Yes, there's a certain amount of them that have to be handicapped. Plus, we have elevator access, so every single floor will be handicap accessible, and there'll be enough units to meet all the codes as far as being handicap accessible.
But Shane, you're right, because I had an older woman who also wouldn't fit the income limits and wanted to live downtown, and she wanted an elevator, and so this would be an elevator.
Yeah, we wouldn't even venture this thing if we thought there was a lack of renters for our properties. And
I'm sure you wouldn't.
And another part about Franz Hobart, all the buildings we hold ourselves. We'll be holding this building. We don't flip them, sell them. If they don't cash flow, there's no reason for us to do the project in the first place. So we do a lot of investigation. We do a lot of word of mouth information from city councils, economic development people, businesses, bankers especially. They kind of got their finger in the pulse of what's going on. So.
It's like a great program.
I think it will be. I think we're all excited. I know we're very happy Two Rivers is excited about it, and it's been great working with the people here in Burlington.
What kind of timeline do we need to have for an approval here?
Jason, what are you looking for?
Let's get down to business. Next week.
We got your shovels ready.
That was an aside.
Would you turn off the cameras?
Well, Jason's sort of been coming up here week after week, saying, "Can we move things along?"
We have been in this process for many, many months, and I was not prepared to present the original cap to you. I felt we needed to do a lot more work to make this as reasonable a deal for the city and still make the project work. So it has been delayed for a long time on my part, trying to make the pieces fit together. So I think that there is an option on the building that expires at some point. So it's certainly, we're not expecting approval tonight, but it would be nice to move this along in a reasonable manner.
What's the ask? What is the formal ask?
The ask is for the 90% TIF rebate for a 15-year period.
And did you come up with a not to exceed figure that you were thinking of?
We're going to have to determine that exact number for you. I think at this point in time, we estimate that the appraisal is likely to come in, or the assessed value for tax purposes is likely to come in the $4 million range. Now, it could be plus or minus $1 million. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but there aren't a lot of comparables to that building, so it's very possible that it could change. But I think we'd like to have perhaps another week to round out those numbers and bring you a not-to-exceed number that we should all feel comfortable with.
And so the kind of the timeline that we'd be looking at is once we have that number, we can work with our bonding attorney to put together the resolutions and for setting public hearings and the formal documents that need to be done. We'd probably be looking at not this next council meeting, but the one after that, having a resolution to set a public hearing for the following council meeting. Does that make sense?
Which would put us in.
That'd be the second in October.
Yes.
So we'd be looking at approval in October.
If you're looking for a faster timeline, we need a number for that not to exceed figures sooner rather than next week.
So if we could get that number to you yet this week, then perhaps you could set the date next Monday for a public hearing 2 weeks later.
We're on target. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is similar to these other projects then that we're
Yes.
just going to rebate
It would be a
back?
rebate of their request is for rebate back of taxes.
And so we still gain net taxes on this building. Again, we gain.
Now,
No, I just want to make that clear to everybody because some people out there always think we're paying and we still have a gain here.
Yeah, I mean, even in the interim, if it's a $5 million building, you're looking at additional $20,000 in revenues per year. And then when the rebate's over, you're $190,000.
Yeah. Well, 10 years from now, we should be sitting really well with all these properties when they.
one of the big things that's a success out of this is we've had some discussions over this. What little hair I have left on top that was trying to pull out as we talked about how do we come up with all the different pieces that are being asked for to make this work. The parking ramp was the biggest sticking issue to make this successful, and having a viable alternative come up that allowed that to occur without it being in city hands where we're having to finance that when we're still coming up with solutions of our own was a major thing. But that is going to be an issue moving forward. It's still going to be an issue for how do we handle it if there's additional development.
Which there will be.
Yeah, this pretty much guarantees that there'll be more.
It's going to snowball, there's no doubt about it. So I want to thank you very, very much. I appreciate it so much, all the work you put into this. This is a good indicator of good things to come, Jason,
right.
so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you, Mr. Hobart. Thank you. All right. Good news.
I love that picture. So are you printing that in the paper, Michael?
Now, we come to the meat of the issue. Yeah, that's pretty good news there. That's great. And this will be good news too, right, Travis?
Thanks for making me follow that.
Travis, you haven't been doing well lately. You better step down.
This is an update on the policy plan budget that we started back there 2 weeks ago. And see, we have some new intermediate plan updates now on the finances. Okay.
You got my light show.
Now, while we're waiting for that, Council, do you have any committee reports that you'd like to give?
I don't, but I wanted to wish you a happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you.
I have a committee report. Because the senior center, I went to their board meeting, and the chairman of their board quit at that time,
Oh, no.
and I was traumatized by this.
Oh.
Back to
Oh, no.
Really, they just, it was bingo.
That's it, huh?
That's it.
Don't you get cheaper panels?
And
That completes my report.
thank you.
Short and sweet. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Mark, just so you know, Councilwoman Anderson says she's available, and
I'm gonna look at my
either
schedule.
Mayor Pro Tem or Mayor will be there also. 10 o'clock on Wednesday. Okay. Travis is about ready.
Are you guys?
To work his magic.
Folks at home, this is Travis Squires from Piper Jaffray. You've heard his voice before.
Very good.
Good.
Well, thanks for having us out again. I'm just going to go through an update, focus a little bit more on the part we kind of skipped last week with the financial policies. Hope to get some feedback from the council now that you've had them for a couple weeks. I recognize that you might not have marked them up and reviewed every last jot and tittle of them, but you know, we're looking for feedback from the council. We'll walk through some of the policies and you know, we look at this as a dialogue, so let's dialogue back and forth on that. And then I've also kind of, I guess, updated some of the projections we went over last week regarding the general fund budget. I've carried it out 10 years, so you can see what the 10-year model looks like versus just a fiscal 14. So you can see really what it'll take to completely, I guess, turn it around and get to some of those perhaps target fund balance policies or target fund balance numbers that we had talked about before. So again, we'll walk through the financial policies. We don't have to do these in this order. We're not going to deal with capital improvement planning or the debt profile. Again, those are kind of the goals that we've kind of worked through for the intermediate plan of finance. For those of you who are first seeing this for the first time, this has been going on since May. We've accomplished some short-term steps in June to kind of right-size some of the capital project deficit balances on the city's books. From here, we're working on the intermediate plan, kind of how do you start the ball rolling to long-term financial stability. And I think some of these steps will help. The policies will set some goals for the council, allow the council to verbalize some goals and lay out some steps on how we'll get there. So the intermediate plan, this is really taking place during this fiscal year between now and budget season. So believe it or not, school year started, we're after Labor Day now. Stephanie probably knows all too well that budgeting season is right around the corner for fiscal 14. It'd be nice to get some of these issues addressed as far as how do you move forward. Obviously, some of this came up during last year's budgeting season, but by that time, the budget was basically all but approved. So getting ahead of this, starting now, we have a couple months to kind of work through how do the numbers work to start turning the financial position, steering the financial position to a place where you're going to be financially solvent in the quickest period of time. When I say financially solvent, that probably brings up different things for different people. When we say financially solvent, we're looking at healthy fund balances in all of your funds, something that the city really hasn't probably had for years. So it's not just a one-time thing that, oh, you're insolvent. Financial solvency means a lot of different things for different people. For your city, a minimum of having 10% operating fund balances is a good goal to start with. I think you can go further think it's probably necessary to go further given the city's position where in the last 15 years you've had to deal with a couple floods. So, I'm sorry, I guess your last 20 years you've had to deal with a couple floods. Having adequate reserves will help you manage that in the future. So are there different parts of your city's profile that require you to have different fund balances? Perhaps. So we'll talk through that a little bit. Again, we're looking kind of this component of the intermediate plan, the financial policies, kind of setting, I guess if you want to say setting the rudder for the ship, setting the direction for the city to move. The city's had some informal policies in the past. And I think it's a good time right now as you're kind of looking at everything. Where does the council want to see your financial balance sheet move in the next 5 to 10 years? You can start by targeting that with some financial policies. On top of that, you're going to understand what every new capital project costs, both short-term, long-term, as well as looking at budgetary levy implications and also your enterprise rates for the next 5 to 10 years. It's all going to be out there. Council's going to know at the time they're approving their budget what the next 5 years should look like. Something the council hasn't really had the privilege of going through. It will be a time-consuming process, and there's probably going to be some lumps and some extra time commitment this first year. But what I can tell you, guys are certainly up to the task. So timeline over the next couple months, continue to work towards this. I guess the first thing is really starting to hammer through some of those financial policies that we put in front of you. So if you do have that handout, there are a whole host of policies, 38 to be exact. So we're not going to read through verbatim policy by policy. But I do want to get you just kind of a background on why these policies are necessary. I know you guys have heard it, but it's good for the public, I think, to hear as well. These aren't just something that you throw out there that allow you to do whatever you want to do. They're things that help think long-term about the city's financial future, not putting yourself in a position where you're over-leveraged, reserving debt limit capacity for times of emergency, as well as setting good budgetary guidelines. How much operating capital reserve should be built in your budget for unknown things that might come up, something the city hasn't really had the luxury of doing in the past. So working to a point where you can do that as well. As far as considerations, working with recent rating agency comments, best practices from Government Finance Officers Association, looking at comparable policies from other cities, and then lastly, what are the city's needs? Every city has a unique set of circumstances that require unique policies. Burlington is no different. As much as you may like to use comparables, whether it's within your county or your demographic group as far as size, the city's going to have unique needs regarding policies as well. So these draft policies do not view as final. We can add, delete, modify, and we'll work on finalizing with city's administration and the council's input. And then later this fall, be able to present for approval. Again, you'll go through formal adoption policy would be my assumption. Have some hearings involved with setting new policies, and I anticipate that to take place later this fall. We would have them then adopted before the budgetary process, and again, would be the rudder to help guide the ship through that process. Any questions from the council?
When these processes, will we develop those at meetings like this, or will we have special meetings to develop these processes?
To do these?
Like to develop processes, how much do we work together, I guess?
As far as the budgeting side or the policy side?
The policy side.
Well, the policy side, you have some in front of you. So these are meant to be draft.
So do you want
all
comment?
of your feedback. So if you look through and it doesn't make sense, and you have a different suggestion, then let's dialogue on that. Work sessions certainly work. These can be time intensive. When we first went through them, we literally sat down for 2 hours walking through some of these policies. So I'm not opposed to doing that. For time purposes, it might be good for you all to kind of work through them on your own, bring back questions, and then those questions can be specifically addressed
Okay.
then at a future work
I just want to know how to respond to this, I
So
guess.
what you're telling me then, Travis, is if I have a question about some of these that I maybe don't understand right now, you don't want to deal with that right now?
No, I do want to deal with it right now.
Okay.
As much as you guys want to deal with them tonight, I'd like to deal with questions right now. If you haven't had a chance to fully review and have all your comments ready, then we can certainly deal with them down the road. What I'm saying is, once we leave tonight, we don't have to have all of your comments in. The more comments we have now, the better we can present a revised version than in a couple weeks or whenever that might be for review again, and then gather more comments. We kind of view it as a back and forth process. Nothing will be approved or go before the council for approval until we've received a lot of comments. It's supposed to be open dialogue.
Well, as I mentioned to you this afternoon, there's a number, quite a few of editing type things here. So can I just give you this and where I've got marks?
Yep.
And okay. Can you just explain a couple of them to me, though? I'm having trouble comprehending.
Okay.
I don't mind admitting that. On page, excuse me, on page 5, under unassigned fund balance, the last sentence, in other funds, the unassigned classification should be used only to report a deficit balance resulting from overspending for, I assume, the specific purpose for which the amount has been restricted, committed, or assigned. Can you make that sound in English for me?
That's your auditor.
Yeah, this is an accounting standard that we implemented last year. They had these new fund balance definitions. So the unassigned fund balance basically is for the general fund, which is unrestricted. So when it says in other funds, it's saying in the other funds besides the general fund.
Oh, okay.
So like special revenue funds, usually a special revenue fund is for a specific purpose, so it can never be unassigned. The only reason it can be unassigned is if you're carrying a negative balance in it, because you can't have a negative restricted balance.
I see.
So that's kind of what it's trying to explain is if you have a deficit balance from overspending in another fund besides your general fund, then it would be unassigned.
Okay. Okay, and Stephanie, I suppose you can answer this next one for me too. On page 6, under equipment policy. Assets that are the second one, the second paragraph. Assets that are intangible in nature, have a useful life of 2 or more years, and have a minimum cost of $20,000 will be capitalized.
Intangible means it's not a physical asset, so intangible could be like software. We don't have a lot of them within the city.
Okay.
It's kind of some canned language that we were going to work on changing this equipment policy to probably explain it better and what the city uses.
Right. We didn't have a base equipment policy to really go from, so we borrowed language from another policy. And that was one that's been flagged that needs some revision, so.
Okay. If it's okay, Council, I'll just keep going if you want. Okay, on page 10, on policy 26. I just have a big question mark on that one. I don't know what it is. I just need some help again. Particularly the last sentence, whether this statute is anticipated that local option sales taxes and tax increment revenues are considered taxation as contemplated in the code is not clear.
Okay. Iowa Code, Chapter 76.4, talks about in the issuance of public debt, when you have issued general obligation bonds in the past, you certify a debt service levy for those. In the process of your budget, you go through and you might identify the use of other funds towards the abatement of those taxes. In some cases, it is TIF, or tax increment financing revenue. So you've issued general obligation bonds, and then you're paying them back with tax increment financing revenues. It might be local option sales tax funds that you're paying back, the general obligation debt. The way the code reads is you must have cash on hand at the time that you're certifying your budget. So in the case of the city in March. So when you certify the budget, you need to have the cash on hand in order to not levy the taxes.
So your local option sales tax has to have a balance in it at that time, at least large enough for the next year's debt service payment that's going to be paid for from local option sales tax.
Correct. And it's not clear how this interpretation is really, does it have to be in those exact funds? Because that would certainly not have been the case for the city in either of the TIF funds that had a deficit balance.
Yeah, see that.
So it'd be total cash on hand has been how a lot of the interpretation has been made.
Okay.
And that last sentence is, it's not clear if that's necessarily the appropriate. I mean, your auditor is ultimately the one who's coming through on this. Your county should also be verifying this as well. We view this as a best practice, that you would have the funds identified ahead of time so that you have cash available. Otherwise, what happens if the cash isn't available? Throw out a crazy scenario that you didn't collect your sales tax, it was late. You would end up having to borrow from another fund to pay your general obligation debt. But your bondholders have an unlimited tax pledge of the city. And Iowa code protects the bondholders in that case, that you've gone through the process appropriately, and then you had funds on hand at the time you certified your budget in order to not levy the taxes. This one may need some clarification. This one's a little bit raw as far as what's the best way to go about this. We could talk with your auditor, certainly, if they have a recommendation on how this policy would read. That would probably be a good place to start.
Yeah, okay.
Does that help?
Okay. I'm getting there, Travis and Stephanie, thank you. We were just talking about rebate agreements here, and so policy 29. I guess I don't understand what we're supposed to do here in this last paragraph. It says the city shall choose to appropriate or not at the last council meeting in November. Can certify the county TIF obligations outstanding as of December. The city may not certify an obligation on December 1. That was not previously appropriated by city council by resolution. Is that going to handicap or restrict us in some way, or is this legally the way we're supposed to do it?
It's legally the way you're supposed to do it. It's an annual appropriation rebate agreement. If you realize the language in there, and the reason the language is in there like that is so that the total obligation, which may or may not happen, the development doesn't happen, let's say, you don't want the $2.5 million counting against the city's debt. In other words, it would be an obligation to pay.
Right.
That's why the rebate agreements are set up as an annual appropriation. As you receive the taxes or the valuations on the tax rolls, then you certify the debt for the next year that you'll make the rebate back to the developer.
And is that
Okay.
because this is tied to property taxes and it kind of matches up with the date that we do abatements and?
And the TIF certification.
And
Yeah,
the
TIF
TIF, so
certification
it's-
this is all out of state statute for when we're to certify TIF debt is
Okay,
how
so that-
the language on the timing
There's
is in
something
there.
I'm learning, so thank you.
That's my point. A lot of this
Yeah.
is required
It's
by
required.
law. I mean, it's not policy
Yeah.
that we're going to create. I mean,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, this doesn't have to be in here, but it certainly helps us to structure and
And to comply.
so that we know that what we're doing and that we're following a policy for how we typically do this.
Right.
Well, and I think it's good for council people to have this, to understand, because, we learn a lot with this. And I think like new council people, when they do come on, should also get a copy of this so they understand
So
these things we're dealing with.
then if we go to policy 31, would we be in violation of this policy by what we were just talking about doing?
Well, this was the existing, I believe, policy. I hesitate to call it a policy, but it was what was on the books with the city. Something to keep in mind that nothing in any of these policies preclude you from doing what is allowed by Iowa code. And that statement is made up front. However, this does, I mean, these percentages aren't in stone. I mean, you can set the percentages at whatever you want, but they do provide you with, well, these are what our policies are, and if we're going to quote unquote violate or modify a policy at a given point, then there should be a justification for doing so. In all the projects that you've considered, it sounds like the council has adequate dialogue and that you would justify moving forward. And again, this is only to give you some guidelines.
We talked about this some last week with like setting up a debt service schedule on a project. I don't know what policy number it is that talks about having the average payback in 10 years, which essentially is about an 18-year bond if you're doing level payments. It doesn't keep you from doing a 20-year project or a 25-year project, that you better have terms. There should be a justification for why you're going against that recommended policy.
And I think it's great that we're adopting this. It sets some standards for not only us, but future councils to follow too. And I have one more question. Again, this is TIF, and I assume it's state law, but it says each application for TIF shall be reviewed by a review committee who shall make a recommendation to City Council upon the merits of the request. We don't have such a committee.
No, this is similar, and this is similar to the capital improvement plan. We don't have a capital improvement plan in place, nor do we have, if we did have one, what we do have doesn't go through the planning commission. There's the policy that's in here talks about formalizing that capital improvement plan or 5-year capital improvement plan, having it approved by planning commission before coming here. And that's not something that necessarily has to happen, either in that case or the one that you're mentioning. But this is a structure that we can do. Still those are things that we have to, are those the way that you want to see it occur or not?
Okay.
Was that an affirmative, that that's something that you agree it would be a good idea? Or?
Who would you have it go through?
I don't know.
That's the question. It has to be a new committee. Right?
No, it wouldn't necessarily. We have an economic development committee that meets quarterly.
Well, that's true.
Or as needed, and that would be a group that could potentially, if you wanted to have this, it could funnel through that group.
That would make sense.
Well, I mean, ultimately, this is one that I could personally take or leave. I mean, if the council wants to make the decision as a group at a work session, and in some ways that might even classify as a review committee to some extent. Doing it as a work session, you're reviewing it then, and then obviously approving it. It doesn't say formal approval. We can modify this language. Maybe the recommendation doesn't go that, but there's at least a review period for any TIF agreement. Because like you said, it's a grant or whatever it might be, an abatement or rebate of taxes over time.
Which would be kind of restrictive in this situation we're talking about tonight, because now we're just extending the process again over a time that...
You just discussed it at a work session tonight.
I mean, if we had a committee that had to go through.
Oh, yeah, it would. Yeah. And especially like that group, it's difficult to... You've changed the structure of what they're doing, what they're meeting quarterly. Now they're going to have to meet on
at least monthly.
Yeah.
Potentially.
And again, this is more put out as a best practice. Like you said, we can take or leave, delete this one.
We are the review.
The second sentence there covers it, though. It says the council makes the final determination. So I'm not sure we need. I'm not sure we need that. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure we need that policy. That's just me.
But that doesn't hurt my feelings, so you can certainly.
Well, and I kind of agree with the mayor, because I'm on that other committee, but there's a lot they'd have to learn and be brought up to where we're going to be discussing it here and we would know, and so maybe it's better that we're just reviewing it.
The one comment I will make is what if you enter a period of growth where you're receiving 10 of these a month?
Right.
We're gonna review every one of them in the list.
Good problem to have.
Then we'll get a committee.
Yeah.
But-
That's a good problem to have. Let's get there.
But it's it comes to us anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Council, it's your turn.
I'm fine with that. No,
It's your turn on any questions now. Thank you.
I
Anthony
guess
and Travis.
the question I had on policy 24, debt margin for general, where are we now on that? It says 30% will be, because I know we're over.
20.
Okay, because I know we're over 70% on, for sure on that.
Yeah, and part of this is, even doing this, I think we talked about doing some transition policies for some of the things that we're not in
Yeah, we
compliance
haven't
with.
outlined one on this yet because we haven't worked through the capital plan. We'd hate to adopt a policy and you already have things on the capital plan. And that says you're going to transition in 5 years when in reality you need 10 years to transition.
And so these are just guidelines, really? Is that what you're saying? Because we're not going to reach this 30% reserve.
It's,
Well, we
these
would
are the
set
kind of,
benchmarks, would be the goal, to set benchmarks that in 5 years you'll be at 25.
Okay.
And
yeah, even if, we need to have and be able to demonstrate where we're headed to in these policies. If it's 15% in a general fund for cash balance, we need to have that in the policy. It's 10%, whatever it is. This debt margin, if that's 30%, makes sense and is realistic, that needs to be here. We need to show that we have reasonable targets that we're moving to, and then we also have to show a transition plan to get where we are now, to carry us from where we are now to where we want to be. And that they have to be things that show that we are making marked improvements.
They have to be measurable.
They have to be measurable, and they can't be 20 years from now. They have to be a period certain. That outside of that, Moody's is not, or any rating agency is not going to be satisfied with what we're doing.
And with the 30%, I mean, if we're saying 10 years, in 10 years you've completely flipped your entire debt profile. You do not have general obligation debt really expiring after 10 years right now. So it's a conscious effort of the council to issue less debt each year than you retire.
Right.
And that essentially is what.
I guess I was just thinking, how do we adopt a policy that's not even possible?
No,
to be-
you adopt the policy as a target.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then ideally you outline a transition plan with benchmarks.
Okay.
Can you take me through policy 5 and tell me what your
Yep, so, the way this is outlined right now, just to kind of step back, we have different things about creditworthiness, revenue objectives, operating budget, capital improvement, debt administration, tax increment financing, investment, and financial reporting. So this would fall under revenue. So revenue collections. It just really outlines the formula. A lot of this isn't really new. It talks about revenue estimating. It's best practice to outline how you're doing your budget in a formal policy from the rating agency standpoint. That way you don't get into a situation where 5 years from now you have a council that says, well, we're going to do everything prospectively and we're going to assume growth that's unrealistic going forward for 5 years. This kind of steps it back. So you're looking at property tax collections will be established through tax levy rate for general operations. I don't think anybody argues with that. Enterprise fund revenues are established to support expenditure levels. User fees and charge to establish this. This kind of takes the guesswork out of it when you need to increase enterprise fund revenues. In other words, increase enterprise fund rates, because if your expenditures are outpacing if your expenditures outpacing revenues, then you have a revenue problem, or you might have an expenditure problem.
That's what we've had.
Right, so this sets this up that you're going to match those as part of your budgetary process. It formalizes that goal. Exceptions include, may not be limited to parking, recplex operations. Right now, it's anticipated you do need some general fund support to make both of those work for community reasons. And that might be the case in certain funds where the parking also, maybe shouldn't be a true enterprise fund in some cities, that it would be supported with a general fund. Recplex, there's obviously community benefit for what you're doing, and it's in some ways subsidizing the operations out of your general fund by not charging high enough fees, I guess you would say, or fees that are in line with your expenditure expectations.
Okay, I didn't catch the exception that may not be limited to. All right, that answers it.
Yeah, so we carved out, a lot of cities carve out certain enterprise funds that have what would be viewed as a greater public good that are supported with the general fund. So a lot of cities carve those out. That being said, you don't have to carve those out. You could make them all swim on their own, but know what the implications of that are.
All right.
And one thing you'll notice there, we did not put, just trying to go off of memory, not reading it, a golf course in there.
Right, I noticed that.
And that's sort of a priority. Do you want to say that golf course is important enough that if we get to a spot where we're losing 50, 75,000 a year or some figure and you're needing to support it to keep operations going? Does it raise itself to the extent that you say, this is an essential service that we want to make sure that we provide to the community?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what I was going to say about the Dangward Pool.
I knew you'd bring that up.
Well,
I knew you'd bring
it's
that
a
up.
different question because it's not set up as a revenue fund. The golf course and Recplex are set up as revenue funds, so they're set up theoretically to be revenue neutral. With a golf course, typically you see municipals saying this should be revenue neutral more often than you would with a Recplex facility. And I've kind of, when we did this, I was asking Travis to put the one in and not have the other one there. But you may say that if we're going to continue operating Recplex, it has to be net revenue neutral.
Right.
You may say that the golf course is a high enough priority that we want to make it a policy. We're going to put money into it to supplement it when it falls short. It's just
Right now.
it's just a matter of semantics in terms of where it kind of tells us from a staff level of what your priorities are. It tells the community what your priorities are as well, whether you include them or not.
I just want to make sure that the Dangward Pool is still a priority, and not just a party.
That's something that'll come up at
That'll be part of the
budget time.
Budget time.
Yeah.
This
Right.
is only dealing with enterprise funds, so parking.
Right now, golf course operating expenses are neutral. It's a
This
capital.
last year,
that's-
we made
24,000.
24,000.
The golf course did for FY12.
And I don't think a policy like this, really, if you're operating the golf course at, what's the overall revenues in there? 600,000 a year, 400?
Yeah, it was 4 something, yeah, 4.
That includes capital expenses and everything?
There's a few in there, some, yeah, there was, I think, there ended up being about 8,000 of capital expenses in there. And then the other capital expenses were paid through hotel motel tax. And that was
Yeah,
on
see,
the
that's what-
budget process.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with a budget that's about 500,000, I don't think that a policy like this, it doesn't, not outlining the golf course in it, and it costs, we end up having to put 10,000 or 15,000 into it. I don't think that's a major red flag. It may be something to take a look at and say, is that really what we want to have happen? But that's not the kind of figure where we're really really concerned about seeing that
Right.
kind of money go into a rec program. Now,
Okay.
if it's 50 or 100,000, that's really, that's a big violation of this policy, and then it becomes a much bigger trigger of what we need to look at.
Part of this is targeted too at avoiding having the deficit balances.
Yeah.
everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
I've seen policies also that specify that you will not support more than a certain percentage of the budget, even with exceptions including, but will not support more than X percent of the budget.
Okay.
Again, these objectives are more for the budgeting process. Obviously, you're going to review last year's actuals and say, okay, well, we've consistently budgeted for break even, but we've never really actually been there. Well, then we have to be realistic on both those revenue and expenditure side.
Jim, a lot of this, though, is required compliance with codes and so forth, right? I mean, aren't we gonna get to a point?
A lot of it is.
Yes. And aren't we gonna get to a point where you, as our manager, are gonna say, all right, council, here are the specific issues that you must address? And in more specific terms than, this is great, and I really appreciate all this information,
But there aren't very many policies in here that I care a tremendous amount about. This one is of concern to me in terms of saying, for the most part, we're saying with things like sanitation or sewer, we're not going to subsidize them with general fund money. They need to have a rate structure in place that covers the cost of providing the service if we're going to offer the service. And that's why you see the exceptions on the other ones. They're not ones you as often see saying that we're going, that they need to be able to fund themselves as a true enterprise. The cash balance, the cash targets for how much money is going to be in the funds, that is a big piece of what I think is very important. The 30% figure for debt service capacity, that is a big deal, because when we go to put together a 5-year capital improvement plan, we have to make sure that we can realistically afford to pay for the things that are in that based off of our policy. A lot of the other ones aren't as concerning for what we deal with on a day-to-day operations basis, but it does formalize the operating rules that we operate under. We won't come across them on a day-to-day basis.
Right, okay.
And I don't know if I'm skipping over some, but those 3 areas are really ones that are a major concern for.
Yeah, the working fund, setting expenditures, balanced budget, building in, what is that policy, operating reserve, wherein you are actually budgeting an operating reserve as a line item, basically expenditure, where you're not spending 100% of your annual revenues and allowing for the fact that you may have been wrong in some of the expenditure.
Right.
And we have line items in our budget for that operating reserve, but it hasn't been budgeted for some time.
Right.
And there just hasn't been the funds to do it.
Well, see, to me, that's why this is important.
And the capital improvement plan area, to me, is a big thing. We haven't really, on an annual basis, put together capital improvement plans. We've had some of the departments who put together 5-year plans, but unless you're doing it for the whole city, you can't get a good pick. You can't realistically plan 5 years out if you're not looking at everything.
Right.
And you can't make your debt service. The debt service is the biggest thing for not doing a project this year that just handcuffs you 2 years down the road when you have something else that you need to do. That's probably the biggest concern I have moving forward. And I want to have, for me, having these policies in place and formally approved before we get in depth into the budget process is really important, because it is asking you all to look at these and say these are our priorities before you get into the emotions of a specific topic. And then you have to balance out that specific topic, whether it's banquet pool or whatever it is, against what you've already said are your ground rules.
There will be some emotion in the process.
And then you'll violate the policies at some point too,
Well,
and
and
that's to be expected.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I was kind of concerned about on that debt policy, because if we agree to this, 30% now, it's really going to cut what we were looking at, maybe possibly borrowing to do certain things before we do the budget. So that's why, that's, I guess, knowing that could be kind of tough when it comes to.
Well, and then it forces you to prioritize a little bit more, and makes you think through the process of when we go to look at some of those projects that may take us to a higher percentage and limit our ability to have that emergency fund to cover unforeseen things that come up. Is it truly worth violating a policy or not? And it might be. But you have to make sure that you think through that as a group.
But our policy now is 20%, but what
We
is
don't
our?
have a policy.
Oh, we don't, but that's where we are at 20?
We have 20% right now.
Okay, because I guess I was surprised we had 20%. I thought we had like 15%.
It's right at 20, even after the filings in June. So-
Is it? Okay, well that, like I said, that's better. I guess I thought we were like at 85% of our
And
capacity.
we saw policies that said anywhere between 40 and 20. Given your geographical location, I would probably err more to the higher side. 30 seems like.
Given
a
our
good-
geographic location, okay, what?
By the river.
Outside
On
of the
the
metro.
river.
Oh, okay.
I mean, because those are unforeseen things that you have no control
I see what
over.
you're saying,
You may
okay.
have to
Yeah.
reserve.
In case there's
some-
another flood, yes,
Yeah.
okay.
And it's hit us several times in the last few years.
I mean, it's not the reason to have 30%, but it is a consideration for what are unforeseen circumstances. Because what that is reserving for unforeseen circumstances and just what is a good cushion or
Yeah.
margin that we want to reserve. Maybe you have the opportunity to bring in a major commercial industry player, and you need to reserve some capacity down the road to be able to do that. You could violate your policy to do so, but if you are at 90% of your debt limit, you have no flexibility to do anything that could possibly be economically of the greater good for the city.
Well, I guess I feel like now we know where we've been and we don't want to go there again. You know, as far as where we, financially, where we are, that we have no reserve practically, and I guess this is good because we don't want to go back to something like this, and hopefully that would keep us from going down that road again.
You know, the thing that really needs to be hammered out is on page 7, the target ending cash balances.
Yes.
There needs to be some guidelines, because that's going to drive the rest of your conversations. Because not only are you raising some deficits in some of these funds, but you're going to want to look to have a reserve. So if you have a year where the golf course, or I don't want to pick on the golf course anymore, but you know, any of these enterprise funds run over by a little bit. If you have adequate reserves, you can cover a 5% overage in your operating budget.
Mhm.
Where the city hasn't had the flexibility to do
Right.
that. So whether that's 12, 15, 20, 25, whatever that amount is, a lot of enterprise funds are more to the 25% range, because you're expecting those to cash flow themselves on an annual basis without the general fund support. So a lot of times you see a higher percentage on enterprise funds. General fund, you know, it's been thrown out, let's get to 10%. I don't know if 10% is really a needle mover necessarily with the rating agency, to tell you the truth. It'll be respectable, but for a city of Burlington stature, 20 to 25 is more responsible.
You don't think 15 would?
15 would be good.
Make a,
I think your long-term goal should be 20 to 25. However, that being said, the state is saying that's too high. So,
Yes.
you know, there's competing interests here. You're not a bank. However, you need to be able to operate fluidly. Is 15 a good number? Maybe.
I'm just
Maybe
thinking
that's
it's
the
more
target.
doable. Do you think 20% is doable?
20?
Yeah.
Well, I just,
Over
well,
10 years?
but we would have to do quite a bit of raising property taxes to get to 20%, wouldn't we?
If you're going to, depending on the speed in which you're doing it.
That would be pretty aggressive. Are you talking about in what, how many year period? 10?
But, you know, there's other ways to get there.
Yes,
Yeah.
but I mean, if we say 10, we're not saying that a policy is so much that we're going to be looking so hard at raising property taxes. If we say 20, we're going to look harder at raising property
Well,
taxes.
it comes down to what are you comfortable with?
But
The
remember,
reality
these are
is,
targets.
unless you take action relatively quickly, I mean, you're on review, or not on review, but you have a negative outlook on your rating right now. Which means at any given point in time, the rating agency can review, which they can do at any time, and you could be eligible for a downgrade or staying the same. Negative outlook just means your general demographics of the city, in which case they mainly outline your fund balance with the issues. So not addressing the fund balance would lead me to believe that if you don't address it, then action to come.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that give us a better outlook if we, even if our mark wasn't exactly where we, like we want to be at 20-25%. But if we set a benchmark at 15 and aggressively hit that, wouldn't that make us look better?
Oh, yes, definitely. You can set the mark at 20, and you can outline a plan that says, well, in 5 years, we're going to be at 8. In 10 years, we're going to be at 15. And over the course of time, we're going to eventually get to 20.
Yeah,
See,
I would be
that's
more
the-
comfortable
That's
with
the
that.
key. You can't just say,
Yeah.
next year we're going to be at 20.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
No.
Well, I didn't want to say it at 5 years that we'd be at 20, because I just don't think
No,
that's
5
realistic.
years at 20 is not possible.
Yeah,
5 years at 10, I think is doable.
yes, and that, I guess I was looking at where we're going to be in 5 years, and when we were talking 10, I could see that, but 20, no, it'd be,
And the other piece of it is not only are you bringing up the fund balance, but you're unwinding
Right.
$4 million in deficit balance
Mhm.
and in various funds.
Mhm.
4 million.
So it's not as simple as, well, we're getting 10%.
Yeah,
have a lot of
you
other work
got,
to
you
get
got
there.
two set, yeah.
And how
Two
do
things.
we determine these percentages then that need to be filled in? Is that something that Stephanie can kind
I
of,
think there has to be recommendation.
That's recommendation by us.
a
from
recommendation
staff, I
from
think,
us
isn't it,
or
Jim?
the staff,
It
yeah?
can come from staff, but
I-
it's got to be something you're comfortable with as well.
I wouldn't have any of them under 10% of your.
Oh, no.
No.
Of your operating expenditures.
And
How
maybe
fast can you get to them is the question. And I don't know if that's something that you talk about, Travis, where you put in here figures that we're trying to hit in 10 years, and then 5 years from now, we're reviewing this and saying our new objective is a higher figure. Because if you look at 10 years, like the Recplex sitting at 600,000 in the hole, we're talking about doing transfers of 100,000 a year for the next 6 years just to get to zero. And it's gonna take you that full 10 years just to really get to that 10% realistically. Do you want to put it too much higher than that for a 10-year goal? I have concerns, even if you think it should be higher than that, long-term. 10 to 15 is probably the highest that I would really go, recognizing where we're starting from on most of these things.
I agree.
If you,
The only thing I would add is recommendation on the general fund more in line with a 20% target, even if it's more of a 15 to 20-year target.
sewer is a different deal. Sewer, we already have a significant cash balance, but we have to. We have to have a year's worth of debt service payments, and we're trying to operate at 25% carryover balance there already. And we've put in a rate structure that is trying to make sure that as we meet the requirements we have on us with the sewer separation, that we're maintaining those standards, 25% of operating expenditures plus 100% of the next year's debt service payments. And those are kind of required of us with the revenue bonds that we're issuing anyway. So that would be very specific, and we're already on target.
Travis, I know you have a time restriction. Are we moving along quickly enough for you here?
Your time restriction is more restricted than mine, so
Okay.
I'm good.
That's right, we have to be done by 6:30.
Got your phone number, I'll just call you.
All right.
Who's in here after 6?
There's a planning zoning, I think.
Anyway, the sewer, that would be 25% plus, worded towards 25% plus 100% of debt service payments.
Yeah, the debt service reserve is a requirement that's set by the bond resolution, so, and a lot of these enterprise funds, you could also just have that as a general, if you have debt outstanding, you would have at least 1 year's payment as a reserve.
As a separate,
Yeah.
and then just the 25% of operating expenditures.
So these blanks that we need to fill in aren't really just a number, it can say so much over a period of years.
Yeah,
something
I mean, you
like
can be
that.
as specific as you want. I think in here you would have a target number here, and then below you would talk about a transition. plan.
I see,
So you can
okay.
kind of see we have some sample language there with the general fund. Just kind of some basic, that's probably this, that's one route you could go. That's probably a very conservative way of getting there.
Mhm.
You may want to be more aggressive.
Okay.
Transition plan will be different for the other ones because the others are negative balances. We're trying to get most of them to zero, 5 to 7 years.
You want to go to that portion, kind of skip through? Are there any questions on policies, and we'll kind of go through that section of the presentation?
When do you want our remarks on this? I mean, when are we finalizing this?
When you're comfortable with it, but we need to
Keep working on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think for sure within the next month, you'd like to have at least a second draft for another review.
Okay.
If not within 2 weeks, to have a second draft.
And on this one, we can fill in some targeted cash balance and then the language for transition plans based off of what we've said tonight. And then if you want to change figures, change them.
This is it's going to be an update of what we talked about last week. I know this sheet here in particular was, it's labeled B1 here at the bottom, lost reallocation. I kind of ignore the reallocation and just look at the anticipated deficit. So these are just individual funds broken out. Bring specific, if you look at the bottom, road use tax, parking fund, Flint Hills Golf, these are the ones that we're talking about are going to take a transition plan to right size these balances. You'll see that on the next couple of pages, but if you were to total up the entirety, about $4.4 million between all of these various funds. Most of them you're going to be looking at, it's going to come from the general fund in some way, because you can't transfer these over to a debt service level, for example. Lost, so a loss transfer to the general fund, then property tax relief for these purposes may or may not be possible. It's something we're going to probably have to do some more careful looking at the ballot language, what is allowed for those reallocations. Most of these would fall under the broader umbrella of property tax relief, because if you're not reallocating loss funds, then it would be a levy.
And the transfer from having it structured to where this, if we were moving the lost money over to the general fund and then using general fund money over to cover some of these deficits, I mean, any money that's coming out of the general fund, theoretically, we could be increasing our property tax asking to do it, which is your justification for talking about the lost as an offset.
Right.
But we still have to make sure that we're talking about that correctly.
Right. So this number is on top of the capital projects financed in June. We outlined some target general fund balance scenarios last week. I didn't change any of these, just illustrating how much you're adding to your annual balance. What I did do, obviously scenario 2 gets you to 25% by year 10. What you see then is by the time you get to year 10, you've really made all the cuts you would need, or revenue increases that you would need, and you kind of plateau. So it's going to be a little bit of a moving target, because you're not going to want to ramp up and get there and then all of a sudden, not that you're falling off a cliff, but you're going to want to ease your way into a sustainable budget. This doesn't try to take into account how that happens. It just gives you the raw numbers on how you get there. Again, there's a 3% growth, budget growth, 2% budget growth. This is a new slide. So this is taken into account the long-term borrowing that will need to take place at some point in time for the capital projects that we're financing. So you had a 2012 C issue that funded your 2012-13 CIP program, the capital improvement program, and then retiring 2000G, which was non-TIF capital expenditures, your deficit balances. So you need to finance those. I've thrown in there some estimated bonding cost on the alarm. I think those are certainly high. Assume that you're able to get to a point where you're getting a rating. Obviously, we'll see if that route happens. So you have level principal and interest over 10 years. You've got about a 1.75 to 2% average rate. It's about $400,000 annually. Over 10 years, you pay level principal and interest. Scenario 2 would be no principal until year 6. In this case, the big thing you'll notice is your total payments are higher because you're only paying interest only. Scenario 3 is probably a long shot and maybe not even necessarily something we would recommend. Most of your debt doesn't go out into that 11 to 15 year range anyway. We would only probably recommend this scenario if you're trying to get to, let's say, 20% in 10 years. This would allow you to divert all of your money towards building up the general fund. And basically what it does is it stretches out your deficit reduction plan 15 years. So this becomes part of your deficit reduction plan and you're building up your general fund balance. And this might help with some of the easing that we talked about. The thing about this is you're paying interest expense. And a lot of,
I don't like that.
and not something that long-term you would say is probably fiscally the prudent thing to do.
Right.
Is there a combination between 1 and 2? Is there a 1A? Is there a 2A? You know, are there a million different scenarios you could look at? Certainly. We just tried to present you with a few. The thing I would say that could be appealing about scenario 2 is it allows you to really focus on, if you look at, you essentially have a $400,000 payment versus a $70,000 payment. Overall, you do increase your total payments. That allows you to build an additional $330,000 and put additional $330,000 towards building up your general fund and reducing your deficit balances in those first 5 years. Given you pay for it a little bit in the last few years because now you need more, but it gets you to a solvent position on all of your deficit fund balances more quickly, and it probably gets you to at least your 10% target within the first 5 years. So there are some pros to this, even though you are paying additional interest expense. So, you know, at first it was, you know, I kind of wrote off the scenario, but as we kind of worked through the numbers, maybe this is something really worth considering because it can get you to a place where you've shown real progress with the rating agency on your fund balance side in the first couple of years. They both accomplish the same objectives. It's just what shows up first. And in this case, in scenario 2, you have markedly improved budgets and balances in your audit more quickly than you do in scenario 1. It is at a cost, however. You have to realize you also have higher fund balance on hand, which may help offset some of that additional interest expense. In this time period, you're probably saying, well, 1% on that extra money doesn't make that big of a difference, but 3 years from now, if you're earning 2% on that money, you know, you're really only losing about 0.5% per year. So if you look at the total net interest between scenarios 1 and 2, instead of a $200,000 difference, it may only be closer to $50,000.
And that money that would have been going for principal then would be going to pay down debt or to pay?
Reduce your deficit balances. So, I mean, it's all going somewhere.
So, I mean, if that money's going to pay down debt, then we would be reducing some interest somewhere else, but.
Well, you're not charging yourself interest on your deficit balance.
So we're really just building fund balance,
More quickly.
I see.
So you saw this last week on B5, you only saw year 1. So this takes you out 10 years. Okay.
Stephanie or Jim, are you going to have a recommendation on what would be comfortable with you on these?
Between those two, I mean, it's either one works. The concern, as we talked about it, this is a 10-year plan, and we're here talking about it now. But what puts you in the best position to have decisions made for the next 10 years that keep the city on line with this as transitions occur, both staff and elected officials? I mean, that's, to me, the biggest wild card that you throw into it.
Exactly.
And I don't know which scenario is better on that. But the more flexibility that you have on not putting money aside, that putting money aside, the farther out it gets pushed, the further away it is from when you put in place the plan, and the easier it is not to live up to it.
Exactly.
And I think the second scenario is designed to make you do the ones that are hard, the more difficult thing, building up cash balances, doing it up front. You're going to be committed to making the debt service payments regardless. Whoever's here in 5 or 10 years is still going to have to make those debt service payments.
Yeah, the scenario one on this debt only has you at about 5% fund balance at year 5. And,
Well-
and the commitment then to keep, well, it's a little above 5, but the commitment to keep pushing after 5 years may be more difficult because you've gone through a tough period of time and you've made all your fund balances whole. Scenario 2 accelerates it. It's kind of like you see the progress more upfront.
And that, I guess, scenario 2 appeals to me for more than scenario 1, because I feel like scenario 1 just puts a lot of pressure on us right now to
Well,
come up with money.
The other concern that Travis has raised with scenario 1 is, as the bond rating agencies look at it, are we making significant enough progress fast enough on our fund balances?
Yeah.
You can't control how they're going to evaluate it, but
And scenario 3, I just guess I don't
Oh,
care
man,
for
no.
going that out.
Yeah,
No
I
way,
just-
no way, no way, no way.
That's the extreme.
Yeah.
I recognize that. It's not meant to be morbid. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I look at it, I guess I think scenario, I don't know, scenario 2 is the best option.
Yeah, we're going to work through these more, so this isn't going to be the last time you see it.
Okay, good.
for sure. So, the next 2 pages just quickly take you from year 1 to year 10 and what it is. We had this conversation last meeting, and I just thought, well, we need to look at this 10 years. If we're talking a 10-year plan, how do you get there? What does it look like over 10 years?
Okay.
The big thing you're seeing right here, debt payment scenario 1. So that's from the prior page, scenario 1. General fund balance increase, that's from a few pages earlier. Again, also scenario 1. So the slower building up, adding to the amount you're increasing your budget by $20,000 per year to get you to 10% after 10 years.
So do you have this for scenario 2 also?
I don't, but I can put it together.
Yeah, okay, oh, yeah, I would like to see that.
well, the other thing that you don't have figured in here, Travis, and we didn't talk about it, but as you talk about having a cash balance in those funds, if it's 10% of operating reserves, we're not showing building those up in there either.
Right, and that's the key. So where you see those numbers chopping off on the golf course reduction, that's taking your current balance to 0. So for purposes of comparison, since we haven't set what those balances need to be, it's taking them to 0. So you can see your golf course is going to take you 6.5 years, recplex 7.5, parking 5.5, road use 6.5. You guys can do the math the rest of the way down. Those are long time periods, and that's part of the reason that I started thinking maybe an alternate scenario is something to look at, because you can take care of those more quickly. You can, maybe take care of them all, and I didn't have time to run the scenarios, but most of them within 3 to 4 years, and possibly even be close to 7 or 8% general fund balance as my best guess up front, without really moving the needle on what is required. The thing you're looking at then, if you look at those, cost reductions identified. Again, none of these have been formally adopted. These are just conversations that have taken place between Jim and Stephanie and myself, and some with input from some of the department heads on where might there be some potential cost reductions that could be identified. So if you look year 1, you've come up on the top, what we're calling general fund cost increases of $1,065,000, identified reductions of $940,000, still leaves you with that $125,000 right sizing deficit. Mayor asked the question last time, what would be the levy rate necessary to balance? So you can see that I have put that in that highlighted box all the way across.
So is that, and I can't, oh, mine's not highlighted, which, is this levy rate necessary to balance? Okay, that like 19 cents, then 21, is that 21 on top of the
Nope.
19 cents before?
No, it's
That's
two-
on
2
today's.
2 cents.
Okay, so considering where we are now,
Yep.
it would be
It's-
that.
Very, very good point. It's comparison to now.
Okay. But if we did scenario 2, that number would go down, wouldn't it?
No, it would stay the same with the
Interest
additional
correct.
money going towards your general fund balance increase or paying off your deficit balances along a more expedited time.
And this is considering also the rollback increase.
The rollback, on like, you're saying like if there's rollback on residential property or commercial property?
Because we're increasing, next year is going to be, the rollback will be higher than,
They haven't set that yet, so we don't know
But
the information.
I think
It's just using
basically-
current valuation.
I don't think, did you do any growth on your,
No, I mean, this is a pretty simple A plus
Yeah.
B equals C.
Well-
see, we have to put in, we have to put in growth, before we can get to where we really need to be on overall, you have to put in what you're, based off of historical trends, we've averaged like 1.8% revenue growth on property tax assessed value. We've also then have to put in your historical cost growth. You have to throw in, not, when you're looking at these levies, you have to think in not just the perspective of this, but where does this fit within your capital improvement plan and what you're trying to do there and what that does to your tax asking. And this is
just looking at one small component.
getting to where you have a full look at that is really requires us to do a 5-year budget projection scenario.
Well, and on this, it looks like in 2016, we would be at our highest point on our property tax, right? And then it would gradually start to decrease.
Yeah, keep in mind, this
Well,
only
we
gets
don't
you to
spend
10% after 10 years. We would probably recommend, if you set your target at 15, in this scenario, essentially, you're back to almost your current property tax levy, actually below it.
Well, you're about at it at year
because of the
7.
reductions. Or you're able to
Yeah.
increase expenditures or increase your fund balance more. Because you can see in year 10, your levy rate is technically 15 cents lower than today.
Mhm.
What you would do is you would probably either, one, increase your general fund balance or reduce some of the savings that you would look at.
Well, you haven't put in the balances yet for the other funds.
The other.
Once you try to still do that, get those up to their recommended levels,
Right.
those out years would be, instead of negatives, they'd be
Yeah.
increases in
Yeah,
property taxes.
the next page is, it says scenario 1, it should be scenario 2. And this is the
Okay.
scenario where you get to 25% in 10 years. So this is your more aggressive scenario.
Oh, yeah.
What you see is your general fund balance increase numbers are
Oh,
very large.
okay, well,
You know,
I just looked at year 5, no thank you.
Paul, I mean, yes, that asks you to do either raise
Yeah.
property taxes or you're looking for additional ways to either raise revenue somewhere else or cut expenditure somewhere else.
That's what it boils down to. Matter how you
I
say
mean,
it.
and then that's what, we try to isolate this outside of the budget in some ways, because I think it's best to view it in some ways outside of it, because these are different, I mean, you may have property tax increases just from your normal budget anyway.
right.
Unforeseen property valuations, expenditures that you can't plan for. This is on top of that, dealing with what's gone on with the deficit balance.
Mhm.
So, again, this is pretty linear analysis. I think going to 25% would be more of a 15-year goal. I don't think that this is probably something you're looking at doing, but I mean, I think you have to take this into consideration. If you're looking at best practice, where should we be? 10 years, 25% is probably not out, shouldn't be off the table, in other words.
All in favor, say aye.
Well, I don't know, I just think a lot of people would be upset with us because that means that we're reducing costs, we're raising taxes, I mean,
For a combination.
you know,
Right.
yeah, I just don't know.
Areas that.
It
I
would
have
be
concerns
wonderful,
about
but it's
with-
like committing to saying that we're really gonna,
Right, I mean,
Be
if you're
harsh.
dealing with overcoming 4.4 of deficits, 3.3 of refinancing the old capital projects, it'd be a lot easier proposition. You have other headwinds you're dealing with, recognize that. So, you know, this is just saying, if the rating agency could see a best case scenario, this would be it. But you have to realize you're really taking a lot more than just going from 3% fund balance to 25. Because the magnitude of what you're overcoming is more like going from 3 to 65. or
yeah.
it's somewhere in there.
And I guess personally for me, if I adopt something, I'm pretty committed to it, so I don't want to adopt something
Right.
that I,
I'm just putting out the scenarios as they come up.
And folks, we know this is not going to be for the faint of heart, and we can't look at it and say, oh my gosh, and then draw back, because we're either going to commit to it or we're not.
Amen to that.
So this is the most aggressive scenario. And like I said, not even necessarily a recommended one. But I'm just saying, the politics come from your side. The financial recommendations, we can show you what best practices will look like. We recognize there's other limiting factors that you need to throw in. So we can run scenario after scenario, but we want to at least put the information out there so you can see what it looks like, the magnitude of what it could take, as well as some more realistic scenarios. Again, not going to talk about capital improvement planning, Deborah. In summary, start working on finalizing these financial policies. We're going to take your input from tonight, continue to fine tune them, and look for more feedback as we move forward. I'm going to look at some alternates, some more aggressive, maybe less aggressive plans. Use some of the scenario 2 borrowing, and then kind of look at maybe getting to 15% in 10 years. Those are some feedback that I'm feeling from you. Is that an accurate assessment of some alternate scenarios you'd like to see?
yeah.
Okay. Is that it?
There isn't going to be a test, is there?
Just for you.
Only for the students out there in the audience. Okay.
No fun.
Could we have, at our next work session, Jim, maybe Steve or whoever, give us an update on what animal shelter progress is and where we are on seal coating? And okay.
Yeah.
Tell you a story about seal coating.
Okay.
And do we know when we're going to have a date on that bridge study?
Yeah, that should be coming close, Steve.
I think they're planning to submit that this Friday.
Okay.
14th.
Are you looking at that as something for council as a work session this next time, or?
I haven't submitted it yet. I need to talk to the state, see what process they want us to go through.
Okay.
They go to SHPO first.
And I guess that's part of a reminder, as you say, you need to ask the state. A lot of this is being driven by what the state is asking us to do on this.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Are we done? Okay. Just in time, Mr. Curtis. Thanks for coming and sitting in, folks.
Planning and zoning, I don't know what's on their agenda.
Why are all the
So,
Just to hear what's going on.
Just to review the budget.
Chase everybody gets